Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 120 of the Tick Bootcamp podcast. The title of today's interview is Parenting Lyme, an interview with Dorothy Leland. My name is Richard Johannesson.
And I'm Matt Sabatello.
So, Matt, when I had my scrape with Lyme, what I did is what most old people do. I went onto Amazon, I downloaded all the books or purchased all the books on Lyme disease and read them all. And one of my favorite authors was Dorothy Leland. She co-authored a book entitled When Your Child Has Lyme Disease, A Parent's Survival Guide, and I really enjoyed that book.
And Rich, Dorothy has really touched my life personally as the co-founder of LymeDisease.org. I wish I knew this resource was available to me when I first got diagnosed, but once I found it a few years in, it was really a game changer for me. LymeDisease.org provides such great research information, tools to help you discover alternative treatments for Lyme disease, and also gives you a place to find other people in the Lyme community that you can relate with and talk to about the Lyme experience. Not only that, Dorothy is involved in the My Lyme Data Project, which is a patient registry and research platform launched by LymeDisease.org. Using big data research tools, it allows patients like me to privately pool my information about my Lyme experience and share with others to help them.
So, Matt, I am really excited to introduce Dorothy Leland to the Tick Bootcamp community.
Hey, Dorothy Leland, and welcome to the program.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Well, we're really blessed to have you. So, Dorothy, can you share with us where you live?
I live in Davis, California, which is Northern California near Sacramento.
All right, so as New Yorkers, we always call you folks over in California on the left coast. So welcome left coast to the Tick Bootcamp podcast. And Dorothy, tell us about your background.
Do you mean my personal background, or you mean my background?
Tell us, are you married? Do you have any children? What's your educational background? Talk to us about those kinds of things.
Okay. Well, I was a journalist for a number of years. I did a variety of things that were writing and media, and I wrote children's books. And I was married, and I had 2 kids, and I had just written my second children's novel, and suddenly my daughter, who was 13 at the time, became suddenly disabled overnight. And that was really a plot point for my life that changed things.
So Dorothy, you're living the dream, right? You're writing children's books. You have a couple of beautiful kids, and your daughter, Rachel, who at the time was an athletic young child, comes down with a series of illnesses. So can you share with us how Rachel was doing before she started to show her symptoms of her tick disease, and how that changed?
Well, we live in a town where a lot of kids play soccer, and she played soccer. And she was very good. She was very active. She was good in school. I was a Girl Scout leader. We did things with our Girl Scout troop. And all of a sudden she fell and injured herself in a soccer game. She hurt her wrist, but nobody, that happens when kids play soccer. And we put ice on it, and she took ibuprofen, and it just seemed like that was one of those things. And you get by, you continue with life. Except for us, that was the beginning of a great unraveling. And within a few weeks, she was in so much pain. She needed a wheelchair. She couldn't walk. Everything hurt too much. And people would say, well, why is your daughter in a wheelchair? Oh, she hurt her wrist. I mean, it seemed like kind of a strange thing to say. But looking back on it, it appeared that whatever that original injury was seemed to set off like a body-wide pain response. And pain was the thing she noticed the most, but there were all kinds of other weird symptoms that happened with it. And so we went to the doctor, and they said, they x-rayed the wrist, nothing wrong with the wrist. Oh, you'll get over it. Well, this hurts, the knee hurts, this hurts, the neck hurts. And we were getting in to see specialists, and they would take us seriously at first, and they would test whatever, they give tests for juvenile rheumatoid arthritis. They would give tests for these other things. And then the tests would come back and say, normal, perfectly fine, nothing wrong with her. And then you start having this you know, what do you mean there's nothing wrong with my kids in total, you know, total misery and freaking out. We were all freaking out. And and then they'd say, well, we'll refer to you to a specialist, and then you have to wait 6 weeks to see the specialist. And, you know, it goes on and on and on. And she was deteriorating before our eyes. And we did get into specialists. We did get into a prominent children's hospital that I'm not going to mention by name. And they took us and took her, and I thought, well, they're going to get to the bottom of this. They're just going to test her for everything, you know, 6 weeks from Sunday, and, you know, we'll get this straightened out. And no, what they decided is that actually there wasn't anything wrong with her, and that she was faking it, and that actually it was because I was an overengaged mother, and it was just sort of going down this whole psychological rabbit hole. And it's not that, I mean, hey, when this happens to you, you do have psychological problems, and your mother has psychological problems. But the fact is that, you know, we didn't get where we needed to get. And then finally they just sent us home and said, you know, just, you know, go to the therapist, you'll be fine.
I can tell that you are an engaged parent. Your children are active in sports. Your children were active in scouting. So you were in fact, you were accused of being an overly active mother, maybe a helicopter mom, they might have called you at that time. And I'm wondering, as an active mom, what you knew about ticks and what you knew about Lyme disease at the time that your daughter first started to show her symptoms of what you now know to be her tick disease.
Well, that's easy. That's a big fat zero in terms of except for I started Googling things. And I was talking to a neighbor, and they, you know, my daughter was in a wheelchair. They knew we were having issues. And the neighbor said, you know, asked me, you know, what's the latest about Rachel? And, you know, I told him what I knew, and he said, well, you know, have you ever thought about Lyme disease? Because somebody that we know was in a similar situation, and it turned out that there was it was Lyme disease. And I said, I don't know. And I went right in and I started Googling it, and I called the doctor's office and asked for tests. And the bottom line was, we were told that it couldn't be Lyme disease because we lived in Davis and there's no Lyme disease in Davis.
Well, let's talk about that for a second.
So
was your family just sort of isolated in the community where you lived? And did you ever leave that community?
Well, that's what I said. That's what I said to the guy. I said, we don't spend all our time in Davis. You know, we've traveled. I was a Girl Scout leader. We went camping and, you know, hiking, lots of places that I now know have ticks. But see, one of the things in California, and it's not just California, but California is a big one, is that they just say, oh, I mean, even the CDC, you know, says, oh, you know, you don't have to worry about ticks in California. There's ticks, there are ticks. Actually, I have to say, I had never seen a tick before. I was not aware of them. But there was not a consciousness of it.
So Dorothy, let's stay with that for a second. So we're now talking about 2005, and yes, you're clearly a very educated woman. You are a journalist who would be well aware of world events. You're a scout leader, you're a mom, yet you didn't have any information that you could transfer to your children that would allow them to be safe from ticks and Lyme disease, correct?
Correct, absolutely correct. And that is one of the reasons that I ultimately got in, which I know I'm getting ahead of the story, but that's eventually because I got involved in doing the things that I got doing, because what do you mean nobody knows about this?
But Dorothy, let's explore another piece of your story, and that is you're an educated person of means who has health insurance and the capacity to bring your daughter to some of the top doctors in the state of California, including a children's hospital that shall remain nameless, yet no one diagnosed your daughter with Lyme disease, but one of your neighbors, through what we call bro science, did properly diagnose her very early on in this process.
Yeah, well, or pushed, you know, pointed us in a direction. pointed us in a direction that nobody else was doing,
That was correct, though.
I was going to say when we were at this, famous children's hospital, I had been doing, at the time, we didn't even have, like now you could have your laptop or something while you were there in the waiting room. That didn't exist. But there was one computer that was available for families to use, like in sort of a little library or something in the hospital. And so when my daughter was sleeping or whatever, I would go down there and I would, be Googling stuff about, Lyme disease and whatever. And I asked, because I was coming up with this once my neighbor mentioned it. And I do have to say that at one point we insisted, and they gave us a test that I now know is lousy. And they said, oh, no, she doesn't have it. She's negative on the test. And when I even asked them, like for more information about the test, it was like, oh, well, they didn't know anything about the test. They just knew it was negative. And so anyway, it was actually written in my, so I was asking these doctors at the hospital about, Lyme disease and these things that I was learning. And when you leave the hospital, they write up a report, becomes part of your records. Many people don't get it. Maybe now you can get it online, but there you had to, if you wanted a copy of it, you had to send a self-addressed stamped envelope someplace and pay something. And I got a copy of the report afterwards, and it was written that the mother had an unrealistic idea that her daughter had Lyme disease. That was one of the things that they wrote in there, because I had asked about it. I mean, if I thought she had polio and I said, is there any possibility she could have polio? Would they have written that in there, that I had asked a question about it? I was looking for, for anything I could find. Anyway, it was overwhelmingly, it was a very frustrating, lonely experience where I felt like I didn't have anywhere to turn. And then when we got home, and we were, 'cause my daughter was there for a month, and when we were all back home and they had basically, kicked us out, what shall we do? And finally I contacted an acupuncturist in our hometown that I had some knowledge of before. And I went and talked to him just myself and said, do you know anything about this? And he said, well, bring her in and we can, this or that. And we brought her in, and he talked to her for a long time, and he turned to me and he said, I think she has Lyme disease. He said, but I am not prepared to deal with it. And so you have to find somebody that can, that can help you with this. And so that gave me another direction. And then the thing that really helped the most at that time for me as an information source was online patient support groups. And there's a lot more of those now because, as I say, Facebook didn't exist. And, it was called LymeNet. It's still there, lymenet.org, org or com, anyway. And there was also California Lyme. There was a network of support groups for, California Lyme, New York Lyme, whatever. And California Lyme, I talked to those people and they said, you find this information, it's a variation on what you're doing with your podcast. You're finding people that have already been with it, been dealing with it, and they give you some suggestions. And that's how we found a doctor. We found an ILADS doctor. I don't know anything about ILADS before that. We found an ILADS doctor who was a couple of hours from our house, which isn't too bad in the Lyme world. Some people have to travel a lot further than that to get to somebody that knows something. And actually, that was only 9 months from when she first started showing symptoms to when we actually got a Lyme diagnosis. And I realize now that that's actually a very short time. And many people go years of going to doctors and taking tests and dealing with all this stuff, and the family falling apart, and because it is very hard on the whole family. I have a son too, and blessedly he was not ill, but I think he sometimes, years later, somebody said, somebody that knew me from the Lyme world happened to meet him and said, gee, I didn't know Dorothy had a son. And he said, yeah, I'm familiar with that. But we can laugh about it now, but when a child is so sick, when one family member is so sick, the resources of the family tend to revolve around that person. And that doesn't mean that the other family members don't still have needs. It doesn't mean that at all, but it's very hard. Many families are in that situation. It's very tough.
Dorothy, I'd like to revisit a couple of issues that you discussed with us just during the last couple of minutes. And the first is that you went through the traditional medical process and you were failed at many, many steps. So one of the things that I want to highlight that you didn't discuss yet, but I understand from having read your book, is that some of the doctors actually prescribed medications, for example, that had a negative impact on your daughter. Not only didn't it help her, but it actually exacerbated the problem. So let's just talk about that. So you're a middle-class mom with resources, you have a child that was healthy and then crippled during the course of a very short window of time. You start bringing her to traditional doctors and you can't get a diagnosis. It's clear that she has Lyme disease because many other people who are outside of the traditional system are diagnosing her or suggesting that that's a path you need to examine. And it's one of the things Matt and I talk about all the time. Like, we see Lyme very clearly. We meet people all the time and say, you need to get tested for Lyme disease because we know what the symptomology is, right? But the people in the traditional system not only fail to diagnose her, but they even actually do some things that exacerbate her situations. Let's talk about the doctor who you first treated with, and again, we'll allow him to remain nameless as well, who refused to diagnose her with Lyme and actually treated her with some medications that exacerbated her situation.
Yeah, well, it was a specialist that we were referred to, and we went in, and he said that she should get started on prednisone immediately because she had juvenile rheumatoid arthritis. And I didn't know anything about juvenile rheumatoid arthritis. This guy is an expert. So far we're at a point where we're trusting people, and they said. So we said, okay. And she was, at that time, we had rented a wheelchair because she was going to school. She was going to school at that point, and to get across the class, she could walk a little bit, like across a room, but to get across a campus, was just impossible. And she still wanted to go to school. And so we just rented it for ourselves, and we arranged to have a friend at school that would take her from class to class because it was awkward for her to push herself. And so we went there. That's a whole little side thing. They get really irritated if you get a wheelchair on your own, because it's like they believe that should be prescribed. And it's like, I'm just trying to get her from point A to point B. It seemed like the easiest way to do it. And he gave us this prednisone, and then he ordered a whole bunch of tests, and that were going to be done over scans and various things that were going to be done over the next few days. And we, just followed the orders, and we took the medication. And she, prior to that, as I said, she could hobble. She couldn't even hobble after that. At one point, she was trying to hobble to the bathroom, and she collapsed on the floor in tears. And that was the last time she walked for 3 years. Now, I don't know whether, if we hadn't taken the prednisone, if that alone, would have, she clearly had all these issues, but it just seemed, to my observation, that just pushed her over the cliff. And so we'd only taken a couple of doses of it. And I just called the doctor's office to just tell them that we weren't taking it anymore. And the doctor was very angry. I was hearing this through the nurse, and then we went in person and saw him. And my husband was with us too. And he was very angry that we had stopped taking the medication. and he had the results of the various tests that showed that she didn't have juvenile rheumatoid arthritis, according, I don't even remember now what the tests were. And it was just, and he basically fired us as patients at that point.
Now, part of the reason he fired you as patients is because you were attempting to pursue the Lyme diagnosis at the same time, correct? And he said she can't have Lyme disease because there's no Lyme disease in California, correct?
Right. It was all wrapped up. It was all wrapped up together. It was all wrapped up together. And, you know, it's just, that was before I knew anything about IDSA guidelines and, you know, that kind of thing. I just didn't know that. You think, you know, well, why don't, you know, so we actually got she had not even had any Lyme test at that point, and he fired us because we were asking for one. And then we got another doctor that ordered the test, but it said negative.
Well, let's stay with the first doctor before you move to the second doctor.
Yeah.
But the first doctor was so afraid of a Lyme diagnosis that two things happened, which have me, you know, quite frankly, concerned about your daughter being a victim of the Lyme wars. The first thing is he did not want to diagnose her with Lyme disease. The second thing is, even though she didn't have the symptoms for the arthritis that he ultimately wanted to clinically diagnose her with, he was willing to treat that in a way that actually made her Lyme disease worse, or her, you know,
absolutely. Absolutely.
So it just, you know, we've had podcast guests in the past, Dorothy, where doctors had been willing to diagnose a patient with giantism, even though the woman was only 5'7", rather than diagnose her with Lyme disease.
Yeah.
And what we're seeing, unfortunately, with this construct of doctors fearful of Lyme disease and Lyme diagnosis, in many cases, they're actually hurting their patients by giving them medications such as prednisone, which will exacerbate the symptoms, because we know that a steroid will have a negative impact on the immune response and exacerbate the symptoms, which is exactly what your daughter's case represents.
Yeah. And so, and the thing is, when you're in it, as we were in it, it's like it's just happening to you. You know, it's just, this is me. I'm in this weird situation. We're trying to deal with it. And it was years, you know, some years later that I would find out that that's happening to countless people all, you know, all over the country. And one of the things that really, you know, I wrote the book that we'll get to in a moment. It came out about 5 years ago. And at that time, even though I was talking to people all around the country and stuff for input for that, I hadn't really gone back east in the context of Lyme disease until after the book was out. And I went and did kind of a little book tour and talked to different, you know, Lyme groups and things like that. And one of the things that stunned me was that people that live in Connecticut and Massachusetts have the same kinds of experiences. I thought it was, well, because it's in California and they say, well, there's no Lyme disease in Davis, you know, or whatever. But no, people in Connecticut have trouble getting a Lyme diagnosis. And people in Massachusetts have trouble getting a Lyme diagnosis. And I'm, you know, just anecdotally, I'm aware of a young woman, well, she was young at the time, it was some years back, that she was pregnant when she got bitten by a tick in Connecticut. And, you know, they went to the emergency room right away and they were told, oh, you don't have to worry about it, no problem. And you know, there's just the kinds of things that should be setting off alarm bells, you know, all over the place. Even I just sort of assumed, you know, well, you know, if you were, at least if you were back in the Northeast, people would be saying, well, your experience in New York, you know, I'm sorry, you said you live on Long Island, right?
Long Island, yes.
There's a ton of ticks on Long Island. There's a lot of, and yet it's like, it's stupefying. It's stupefying.
So Dorothy, I want to talk to you as a mom. One of the things that really moved me about your book, and I'm gonna read a quote from the book, is, it was difficult to reassure my frightened, suffering daughter when I was frightened and suffering myself. Can you talk to us about what it was like to be a mom who was going through this very difficult time? You did share with us what your daughter was going through. You shared with us what your son was going through, but I'd like to know more about what you were going through and how your fears impacted your capacity to help your children through these challenges.
Well, I guess I just always thought of myself as somebody that could handle stuff, So something comes up and you handle it. You have a flat tire, you get it changed. You call AAA. And we, as you mentioned, we had health insurance, we had doctors to go to, and suddenly it was like the ground was sort of disintegrating underneath our feet. And the institutions that we had trusted in the past, well, if there was a problem, you go to the doctor and you get what you need. It was really, that was going away. Any confidence that I had relative to that was going away. And also, I remember at the time sending an email to a friend of mine, and when we were in the worst of everything in the beginning and didn't know what we were, what was happening. And I said, those old cartoons where they show a train racing towards the gorge and the bridge is out and the train is going to go over. I said, that's what I feel like. We're on that runaway train and the bridge is out and we're going to go over the cliff and there's nothing we can do about it. And that was just so difficult. And it was, through that time that I started finding, I somehow found LymeNet, I somehow found California Lyme, because there wasn't anybody pointing you to it. You had to find it. And then you would talk to somebody online, you would talk to somebody and they'd say, oh, they had a child that had a similar situation. I was gearing towards the ones that were dealing with children. I mean, there's plenty of adults that were saying things about themselves, and that was useful too. But I would, when my daughter was asleep, I would go into the computer and I would just, use the search thing, the search engine on LymeNet, and I would look up all these keywords and medications and whatever, and find out things that people, that anybody else had said. And that was my lifeline. It was like, oh, there are people that get through it. And I remember one of the things I found online, it was a couple of years old at the time that I saw it, but it was an interview that the Washington Post had done with the author Amy Tan. And, she lived in California and New York or wherever, somewhere back east. She sort of divided her time between the two places. And she said, when she was in California, and she had lots of different problems than what we had. She had a lot of, she was having hallucinations and all kinds of stuff. And, but she would go to top doctors and, they would just say, no, it wasn't this, blah, 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 blah. And then when she finally got a Lyme diagnosis, they said, oh, well, you can't have Lyme because you're in California. And she's saying, well, but half the year I'm in New York. So it was just very strange to me that so many people of seemingly different situations were running, hitting their heads against the same brick walls.
Dorothy, after you were fired by your daughter's rheumatologist because he was making her worse, what doctor did you see next? What were your next steps after that?
Well, that was actually before the children's hospital, and we thought that, well, by golly, we're gonna go to the top here, and so we went through. As I said, it was I don't know, 5 or 6 months of going down those various rabbit holes. And then when we were finally, when we left the care of the hospital, then that was when we started. It was like, well, we've got to find something else. And that's when I started digging more deeply into, other kinds of things. And that's when I said the acupuncturist said, you've got to find somebody that can treat Lyme disease. And then that's when I found out that there were such a thing as ILATS doctors, and that there were, at that time, I think there were 4 of them in California. And we managed to get into one of them. And it was just, and then that's a whole, you know, once you start getting on that, then you hear about things that you wouldn't have heard about before. And, you know, we tried hyperbaric, and we tried, you know, lots of alternative treatments in addition to things. And, you know, they're really, go ahead.
Before we get into the treatments that your daughter did with these Lyme litter doctors, talk to us about how her symptoms progressed, because it started out as a sports-related injury, and you mentioned then she was in a wheelchair, but what other symptoms was she experiencing from Lyme disease?
She had what I now know is called allodynia, or allodynia, I'm not sure how it's pronounced, where if you just, some people have it all over your body, she just had it on her shoulders, where if you touched her with even like a feather white touch, it would feel, she described it as it hurt like being stung by 1,000 bees. And there's whole, now on Facebook and other things, there's whole groups of people that have this symptom, not necessarily Lyme disease, but many of them turn out to have Lyme disease. And she had other issues. She had cognitive issues. There was a time where she couldn't remember things. You know, you would say something to her, and 5 minutes later you'd make a reference to it and she wouldn't know what you were talking about. And I think I mentioned in the book this example where one time I was reading her a story, and we were both enjoying the story. It was just a cute little book somebody gave us, and I read her part of it, and then I set it aside, and I said, let me go make lunch. And then I came back and gave her lunch, and then I said, shall we continue with the story? And she was like, what story? She honestly didn't remember. And there were times when she gave up trying to, she could watch a movie, watch TV. That was before you had streaming services. You could get Netflix on where they would mail you the disc, and we were on the plan where you did 5 at a time, so that as soon as you got one, you could send it back in, and then they'd send you another one. So at any time we had something we could watch. You know, she could watch something, but if you know, she couldn't read a paragraph and make sense out of it. And this is the same time that I have a whole section in the book about schooling, is that the schools want to, you know, they have very clear ideas about how they want to do things. And one of the things that they want to do is that, you know, well, you should have what they call a home hospital teacher. And so this teacher comes to your house, and then they work on, you know, things on you, with you. And we tried that. And there were times that my daughter at that time was sleeping 1 hour at night. She would fall asleep between about midnight and 1 o'clock, and then she would be awake and in misery the rest of the time. And one time, I think it was the first time the teacher was supposed to come, she fell asleep about 7 a.m. and the teacher was supposed to come at 9. And there was no way I was going to wake her up. And I called, and the school district was very angry with me and said, you know, you're not allowed to change these. We ended up, so she was an 8th grade dropout. We ended up dropping out, and eventually doing some online things and some other things. And she ended up going to a special high school program and graduated and was valedictorian from that. But I mean, that was a number of years, but 8th and 9th grade, it was just a very, very lost time. I'm trying to think specifically about sometimes she would have like her fingers felt numb, and she just, you know, mainly, as you said, if you asked her what was going on, she would just say that everything hurt. And then at one point we had an unfortunate thing with one of the hospital physical therapists did something with her. And after that point, she couldn't sit up straight. She had to have, like, she could neither sit up straight nor lie down straight. She had, her most comfortable angle was at an angle, like you would have in a hospital bed. And I was asking, what, it was after we were home from the children's hospital, but before we figured out anything else. And I was asking the physical therapist, maybe we should get her a hospital bed. And they were like, oh no, don't do that. That's just catering to her. And when I went to see the acupuncturist who eventually suggested Lyme, he asked her, he said, is there any position where you feel less bad than others? And she said, well, if I'm at an angle, like we had like a lounge chair, like a patio lounge chair that, she would use at home. She said that was less painful than others. And he just kind of turned to me and said, well, why don't you rent her a hospital bed? And it's like, the true answer to that is because, the hospital said I shouldn't do that. I'd be a bad mother if I did that. And I went home and I rented a hospital bed. And, she had that for, a couple of years. I mean, I think we eventually bought one, but it was, anyway, lots of strange things, but cognitive things and emotional stuff of being, that's a real depressing situation to be in anyway. And then, what may have, Lyme disease, can organically cause depression as well. And so that was an issue as well. And we did find her a specialist, a child therapist that saw her throughout the time, who did not go into it knowing anything about Lyme disease, but was very willing to be educated. And she ended up being a good partner and, in the healing process, and actually now sees Lyme patients in addition to others, because she's acquired some knowledge about it.
So Dorothy,
yes.
This period of time before you found your Lyme litter doctor through iLads, was there anything that you stumbled upon that helped your daughter, aside from therapy that helped her get through the psychological components, that you can recommend as a tip or a trick or a hack to people that are listening to treat some of the symptoms?
There were things that we didn't find in that situation. I mean, we found them later. To say we had years to work on that. There were some things that, again, that I found about online about castor oil packs, which is, castor oil. I always heard castor oil was something, like you'd read in novels that somebody's grandmother made them take when they were feeling ill. I knew nothing about it, but you can actually put it and make a little poultice out of, like, I took an old flannel pillowcase and tore it up into pieces, and you would put this on it, on your knee. The knees were the things that worked best for her. She had a lot of knee pain, and she said that helped her feel better. It brought some relief. Later, through the years, we found there's a lot of kinds of body work that help people. You have to be careful with body work, getting a massage or a Reiki treatment, or there's a variety of other things. Sometimes those can make people feel worse. But she found that, as we continued the journey, as it were, that we found some people that were, there was actually a massage therapist in our town who specializes in medical massage. And she knows a lot about different kinds of pain things, and she was very helpful. But we didn't actually get to that till later. That I didn't really feel like there was anything in from that time. But when people ask me about pain things, I can report that I hear things, basically on the line, Lyme support groups, patient support groups, where people will report things, and something that helps one person will not necessarily help somebody else. And so my recommendation is find out, investigate things and see what's helpful. A lot of people, we tried acupuncture early on, and my daughter didn't want to go forward with it. She didn't like it. I am aware of people who have been helped very much by acupuncture. I think a lot of it depends on the practitioner. So, so that's part of it. There are some people feel better with taking an far infrared sauna. Some people feel better if they take Epsom salt baths. And there are, for every person who said they feel better with that, there's another person who said, I tried that and I felt worse. So I am willing to, for about 8 years, I was co-founder and leader of a Lyme support group, patient support group in Sacramento. It was really after my daughter had improved and moved on. It wasn't for her, but I was getting more involved in activism and stuff. But it was very interesting in the group that there would be people, somebody would say, one particular, a Rife machine really helped them, and they would, offer to let the other person use the Rife machine, and that person would use it and they would say it didn't help. So it's one of the things in my Lyme data, the program that we'll maybe talk about later, but is collecting information from different people. It's like, what helped you? What made you feel better? Not very many people, and it wasn't necessarily talking about pain specifically, just different kinds of symptoms. Not very many people in that program, of the population of people enrolled in that program, not many people have said stem cells, but of the ones that said they did stem cells, only 3% said that they felt that it helped them. And
so Dorothy, I'm sorry to interrupt. You said of all the people who tried stem cells that participated in that study, which is around 13,000, only 3% said they made them feel better?
I think there were only 300 people in the whole group who said they had tried stem cells. And of those 300, 3% said it made them feel better.
Wow.
Now, it was not that these are just people. There's probably people that have taken stem cells that have not enrolled in this program. I mean, we were not, we were not asking, we weren't soliciting people that had done stem cells. It was like, if you've been diagnosed with Lyme disease, will you answer all these questions? And as I said, it was not a very big sample. And so I'm not saying, I'm really not making any conclusions over that. It's just that's, I would say just anecdotally, I have, I've just through the years heard from a lot of people about different kinds of symptoms and treatments. And some people, one woman that was in the Sacramento support group for a number of years was very ill and had done all of the stuff with ILADS doctors and all kinds of things. And she would seem to be getting better, and then she would relapse. And she ended up going to Peru and working with a shaman. And she came back in great shape, and I believe is still doing well. I'm not really in contact with her anymore, but and so somebody else was a friend of hers in the group, went to the same place. She helped her, and she went down there, and they went to the same shaman, did the same treatment, and it didn't help that woman at all. And so I'm not saying it didn't help the first woman. It's just that I hear so much of that what helps one person doesn't necessarily help somebody else. And that's one of the crazy things about this.
So Dorothy, it really is trial and error in the Lyme community, because as you pointed out, what works for me may not work for your daughter. So
Yeah.
Talk to us more about your ILADS Lyme literate doctor who finally diagnosed your daughter with Lyme disease. Once you received that diagnosis, what was the treatment plan for your daughter, and how did it work out?
Well, she took a lot of antibiotics, and but this person, this particular practitioner, also referred us to a number of alternative practitioners that did things for detoxification and supporting the immune system and all of that kind of thing. And the real game changer in terms of my daughter's pain level was a specialized chiropractor who actually we got to ourselves. It was not through our ILADS doctor. And he specialized in upper cervical, there's a phrase for it, upper cervical techniques, basically. And it was amazing. She had been in terrible pain and in a wheelchair for 3 years. And we worked with this guy for a couple of months, and she was largely pain-free and walking after a couple of months. Now, she continued to, she still had Lyme disease and Bartonella, but everybody with Lyme disease and Bartonella isn't racked in pain in a wheelchair. So it was dealing with certain kinds of symptoms. And she continued with that chiropractor for a long, it wasn't just like, okay, we do this and you're done. It was, sort of a, continuing process. But that was a huge part. That was a huge part of her, of her getting well. And part of it was that, as I mentioned before, to her mind, everything was, I hurt so much and I can't walk. And so, yes, she had other things like mental, cognitive issues and things like that. But to her mind, it was just, I hurt so much and I can't walk. And also the allodynia, where you couldn't even touch her, I couldn't touch, nobody could touch her shoulders, or, I hadn't been able to give her a hug for 3 years. And the allodynia continued beyond the time that she was otherwise pain-free and walking, but eventually that cleared up. And it's the same with the work with the chiropractor. He said, we just got to keep doing this. And he described it as she was in a situation where the pain switch was stuck in the on position. And by realigning the body and, doing things that would get to the point where the body would turn the pain switch off. And darned if that didn't happen. And yet she continued to have issues, and she got to a situation where she really, if she was feeling better, and she would try to get off the antibiotics. And as soon as she got off the antibiotics, it was like it would all come back. Things would just, she wasn't back in the wheelchair, but the pain and a lot of things like that. And so it was a long process. She's been off antibiotics for years now, but she was on them for years before. And so, Dorothy, there are problems that come from being on antibiotics too long.
Yes. So on that note, Dorothy, so your daughter was on antibiotics, supplements, and other treatment options from this Lyme-literate doctor, and using those tools with the with the chiropractor, she got the pain relief, right? Now, right. When every time you took her off the antibiotics, you mentioned the pain would come back still with the chiropractor. Is that correct?
Right. And so now, it was the antibiotics were doing something, and whether it was what we think it's doing or it's doing something else. The antibiotics were doing something, and she did. As I say, it was just so. She was also doing, my understanding is a lot of times that they say that if you stop antibiotics and the symptoms immediately come back, you're probably dealing with Bartonella. And she definitely had Bartonella. And Bartonella is really hard to get rid of. Some people think it's even harder to get rid of than Lyme. And so she was doing, a variety of treatments, and as I say, eventually it pulled together, and eventually it worked. And then she went to college. She lived at home for 2 years and went to community college, and then she transferred to Oregon, to Portland State University, as a junior. And while she was up there, she started having all kinds of weird problems that were different weird problems than she had before. And the book really came out before this. I think the book sort of ends with her going off to college, something like that.
Dorothy, before we go into
Yes.
that, I want to interrupt real quick. So how long was it from the time you saw your Lyme literate doctor to the point where your daughter was able to have some sort of life again and be able to go off to college? Was this a couple of months, a couple of years? Give us an idea of this time frame that took place.
Oh, well, it was, we saw the Lyme doctor in the tail end of '05, and she was walking 3 years later. Her walking day is 08/08/08, August 8th, '08. That was the day of the Olympics and in China, and they'd chosen that date because it was good luck. And we said, it is good luck. Anyway, so she was in a wheelchair until then. And then she was in high school at that point. And then she graduated from high school in 10. And then she was lived at home for another 2 years going to community college, but she was not in a wheelchair, but she was still under treatment. She still had issues, but it was the huge thing was gone. And then so it was really, I guess she went to college in 12. And so she was pretty much off antibiotics by then, I think. And she started, so I've lost track however many years that is, 7 years.
7.
And so that, it's been a long haul. And then she started having weird symptoms that were different than anything she'd had before, but they were debilitating. And we were, we'd fly her home and we'd go see the doctor and stuff. And then my co-author of the book, Sandy Berenbaum, is a Lyme literate therapist who lives in Connecticut. And I sent her an email and I said, Rachel's having all these problems, and, we sort of, laid them out. And I said, you got any ideas? And she sent them to a friend of hers who is an ILADS doctor, and didn't say who it was, didn't say anything, said, do you have any ideas for this person? And the person read the list and said, mold. And so that was sort of another rabbit hole we went down. She was off the charts. And of course, Portland had all kinds of, mold issues in the rooms she was in. And she and her boyfriend at one point snuck in and took a mold sample from one of the rooms that she'd been, had her classes in. And it was just, stachybotrys. That building has since been torn down at Portland, but mold really incapacitated her in related and different ways than the Lyme situation. And a lot of people with Lyme disease end up having issues with mold.
So Dorothy, let's just focus on that for a second. So now your daughter's finally feeling better and she's starting to have these new symptoms in college, right? And now you're finding that they're related to mold because most likely she's more susceptible to mold because of her previous experience with Lyme disease. So explain to us how these symptoms were different so people listening can try to identify what symptoms may be mold related and what symptoms may just be a consequence of actual Lyme disease itself.
That's a tough question because the symptoms of Lyme and mold can be so intertwined. I happen to have something sitting on my desk right now. It's called the Townsend Letter, and it's a magazine that's been around for a long time. Their subtitle is The Examiner of Alternative Medicine, and the cover story is Dr. Nicola Ducharme. I don't know if you guys have you interviewed her?
We have actually interviewed her. Yes, she's a
Yeah,
wonderful
and
person.
her cover story is about Lyme disease and mold, and that she talks about how, you know, when somebody first comes into her, one of the things that she needs with these kinds of problems, you know, she needs to try to tease out, you know, is this because of Lyme? Is this because of mold? Is it, you know, because of both, or something else, you know? And that's the thing. So in my daughter's case, and I would say, you know, this is the kind of thing. This was an example. I wish I had it right in front of me. The email that we sent to my friend. But it was like, because I had asked my daughter, describe your symptoms, and I'm going to send it to Sandy and see if she has any ideas. And one of the examples was that if she picked up a bag of groceries, not a terribly heavy bag of groceries, but you know, a hefty bag of groceries, and then set it down, then it was like her arm was just totally weak and she couldn't use it again for a while, and then it would come back. And there were similar things like that. And she went to some of the specialists up at Oregon, and, you know, they you know, did a neurological this and something else that and everything, and that she didn't have all of these awful things that it might be, but nobody knew what it was. And then when we started going down the mold office, you know, rabbit hole, it's not a rabbit hole, it's just a windy path. When we started going down the mold windy path, that there were we just realized that there were a lot of things that were, you know, she may have had mold, you know, mold might have been part of her issue before, except that where we live, you know, isn't like Portland. It's, you know, it's a hotter, drier, you know, kind of thing. And so maybe, you know, you just didn't have this, you know, heavy duty Stachybotrys mold in the basement of an old building in Portland State, you know. And so it took her quite a while to go through the mold treatment, but it did ultimately help. And then
Dorothy, sorry to interrupt again. I just want to ask you, what was the treatment for the mold illness? I'm sure a lot of people listening are curious to know what your daughter did to heal and recover from the mold exposure.
Well, one of the things that you have to do is you have to avoid it, you know, so you have to make sure you're living in a place that's clean and you're avoiding places that are moldy. And it got to the fact, you know, to the point where she had a real sensitive nose. She could walk into a room and say, "Oh, there's mold here," and turn around and go back. You know, that they say that there's mold sniffing dogs, but I think a lot of mold patients kind of learn that for themselves. You know, when it smells like that, I got to get out. And she had her place. She was living in an apartment, and she had it tested, and it was okay. So anyway, but then it's a complicated protocol, but basically there are things that you do to, you know, to detoxify your you know, mold. A lot of people have mold circulating around in them, and there's ways that you have to get it out. And sometimes it's taking charcoal supplements. And,
so things like,
you know,
binders that will help bind the mold and eliminate it and get it out of your body, in addition to avoiding the exposure of the mold as much as possible, because in some cases it is impossible to fully avoid mold. And it sounds like that was the case for your daughter, because she couldn't not go to class, right? So she had to keep going to school, but try to limit her exposure as much as possible, right?
Yeah, except she ended up having to drop out of school. I mean, she graduated, but then she got into graduate school there, and she had to drop out because she was so impaired by the mold. And so she has, you know, she has moved on to other things, and she now lives in Arizona. And I remember that when she told the mold doctor she was moving to Arizona, he said, "Yay!" But the fact is that even though that it's drier there, you have all of these air-conditioned buildings that have leaky air conditioning. And so She said when they hadn't been in Arizona very long, she said at one point they went in, they weren't staying at the hotel, but for some reason they walked into a hotel. It was a meeting there or something, I don't remember what it was. And she said she walked in and she turned around and she walked out because she could smell it. It was mold.
So I got to ask you, and I'm going to interrupt again, it's just, there's so many good parts about what you're saying, and we don't want to miss some of this stuff. If you had to describe it, it's probably hard because I don't know if your daughter ever explained this to you, what would she describe the mold smelled like? So for people that think they may start to be understanding what the smell is like, people that are sick with Lyme and mold illness, how can you describe that? Or how can your daughter describe that?
Yeah, I don't have a good answer to that question. I don't know. I always assumed that it was sort of a musty smell, but I don't know that I ever had her, explain that. But then it was just because and it didn't even, while she was still up in Oregon, at one point, she woke up and couldn't see out of her left eye. And it turned out, she described it as looking like there was a gray Frisbee in front of her eye, but she could see color around the edges, but the gray Frisbee was most of it. And it turned out that she had something called central retinal vein occlusion, which is something that typically happens to people that are really old, like in their 80s or something. It's a blood clot behind the retina, I believe. And she, anyway, we later found in consultation with our ILADS doctors and others that actually happens a lot with people with Bartonella. And so I flew up there and we went to eye doctors and specialists and whatever. And the treatment for that is that they give you a shot of something that's actually a cancer drug, even though it's just not cancer. Give you a shot in your eyeball, which doesn't sound charming to most of us. And that they suspected that she would have to have treatments every month or two for about a year or two till this cleared up. Okay, and then I started talking to my network, and it turns out that there are studies that show that hyperbaric oxygen treatment is helpful for this situation. And so she had actually had hyperbaric as part of the Lyme thing. And that's one of those things, some people have wonderful results, some people have no results, some people are in the middle. We were kind of in the middle to the low end. We didn't feel like there was much of a response to hyperbaric when she took it initially for Lyme disease. When she took it for the eyes, she had her eyesight back after 5 treatments. And she had one shot before we did the hyperbaric, from the other eye doctor. And when she went back, and this was a top specialist, Oregon, one of their big places there. Anyway, stopping saying names. But she went back to him and said, yeah, look, I did the, look, I can see. And she told him about the hyperbaric and everything. And he said, well, I'm really glad you could see, but I just want you to know that the hyperbaric didn't have anything to do with it. It was because you had the shot of Avastin. But he's the one that told us that she was going to need 10 or 12 shots. So anyway, I said, I'm happy she has her eyesight back. I don't care whether maybe it's a combination of the two. I don't know. And so that was, that was before that happened before the identification of the mold problem. And so this kind of thing I hear from Lyme patients a lot, that these things come up, weird conditions come up. And if somebody hasn't given a study about it, there's no place in there that says, oh, this is going to happen. This thing is directly related to Lyme disease or Bartonella or whatever. I mean, a lot of it is anecdotal. All I know is we got our daughter out of the wheelchair by doing a package of things. We got her eyesight back after doing a package of things. We got her to be able to tolerate things, you know, mold and stuff. And then she was in Arizona and working at a school, and she's a speech therapist in the school, and she had, well, two different issues. One was the thing about like picking up the groceries that had happened a little bit back in Oregon. She had that, but it was much heavier, where she would, if she picked up her right arm at all and did anything with it, it would fall to the side and be, she couldn't move it, and it was purple and it was cold to the touch. And she went to a lot of, you know, the different kinds of doctors that you go to, and everybody, well, I don't know what that is. And we found, again, through talking to other people, that we found this wonderful practitioner called a chiropractic neurologist. And he worked with her for about half a year, and that problem went away. And there was no medication that was part of it. It was all kind of brain stuff, and you know, sort of brain exercises and things. And you know, we've just had, and I didn't even get to the part we're talking about DNRS, and I don't know, you know, this is just, I don't know if this is the direction you guys wanted to go in, but
Dorothy, this is perfect. You're going in the right direction.
Okay.
And we want to explore though this neurologist you just described, because your daughter wasn't able to really move her arm, had almost no muscle or ability in use of her arm, and
it would
now
come back. It would come back. It would be like she would do something with her arm, and then she couldn't use it for like a day or something, and she would be incredibly tired, and she would just have to go to bed. And then the next day, it would be like it came back, and it was all right until the next time it happened. And it was just that I had never even heard of chiropractic neurology, but it is apparently somebody becomes a chiropractor, and that's, I don't know, 4 years or whatever it is, and then they do an additional 4 years of training in neurology. But they are not MDs. They do not prescribe medication. And they have things. I went to one of her appointments with her once, and they had, one of the things is like they had her with right next to a mirror, and that she was supposed to do certain kinds of movements while she was looking in the mirror. And I had just watched a television show, I think it was Grey's Anatomy, where they had somebody doing something like that. It's just part of the storyline where they were doing these mirror images, and it had to, I don't even remember the details, but it was like, oh yeah, that's that thing I just saw on TV. And it's fascinating. And I talked to the doctor about it, and he does not treat Lyme disease. I mean, he's not somebody that you would go to be treated for Lyme disease, but he treats a lot of people who have Lyme disease, and they have these issues where it's just, he said, because I was saying, well, can you explain what this is? And he said, well, it's probably an oversimplification, but he said one part of the brain isn't adequately talking to another part of the brain. And we just have things that we have, we have ways of fixing that. And there, some of the things were homework she would do at home, where she was supposed to put like dots, like little sticky dots on her arm, and then look in a mirror, and like not looking at the arm, not looking at the arm itself, but looking in the mirror, do certain kinds of movements. And I can't explain it more than that, but there's just things of using the brain differently. And I can show you, she's made videos. She did a thing where she interviewed the doctor about this, and he has it on his website. But you ought to interview her. she's had an interesting experience. Well, then, so we get to about, we got past all that, and her arm was working fine, and she can do things. In this time, over the years of Lyme and then mold and then, whatever this other stuff was, she was finding that she was developing allergies to foods. And she would eat something, and it wasn't that she was eating junk food. It was like, one time, she could eat asparagus, and then later it would be like, nah, she would say, I lost it. I've lost asparagus. If she ate asparagus, it would make her feel really sick. Or, and so if she was going to come home and visit, I'd have her text me a list of what she could eat. And I would go to the store and I would buy them. So we would have it on hand because there was no other way to, plan around it. And she was getting more chemically sensitive. And so if she was around somebody who was wearing perfume, or she works in an elementary school and they would, clean stuff with Clorox wipes, or the chemicals that you use to clean bathrooms. If she even just walked by the bathroom, it would give her a headache. And it was getting worse and worse and worse. And it got to the point where she was almost having seizures with some of these exposures to the chemicals. And she had not seen her mold doctor for a number of years. And I happened to call him about a different matter relative to my work with LymeDisease.org. And I was talking to him on the phone and we discussed whatever we discussed. And then as we were hanging up, he said, well, how's Rachel doing? And I said, well, I said, she's doing very well, except there's this weird thing about this chemical sensitivity and food sensitivities. And he said, look up DNRS. And so I said, okay, I'll tell her that. And we really didn't discuss it any further. And that stands for Dynamic Neural Retraining Systems. And it's that apparently, and I read the book, and they have a tape or disc that you can get that is part of the program. And when she was done with that, she sent it to me. So I have watched it. I've not done the program myself, but I'm aware of what they do. And it's that part, as I understand it, part of when you're sick for a long time, or lots of, many things, if you're in that situation for a long time, your brain kind of gets used to doing things in a certain way. And so it isn't necessarily, I'm not explaining this very well, but they have exercises for retraining your brain to react differently to it. And so the limbic system is the part that sort of just reacts without you thinking about it. And a lot of people have been helped by this program for specifically food sensitivities and chemical sensitivities. And short version is she did that on her own. You're supposed to do it every day for 6 months. She did it like a religious program. She can be very single-minded about things. And she did it. You were supposed to do it an hour a day, and she did it. And by the end of the time, she could eat anything. And she could have, she could walk by the bathroom at school without fainting from the chemicals. And there has been, I've read other books about this kind of thing. It's the brain does a lot of things. And there are other treatments that, it's not just this exact program. There are other things that are like this, that are limbic system retraining. And, I don't know if you've interviewed Dr. Neil Nathan. He wrote a book called Toxic. He's Lyme, mold, and other integrative care type things. And he recommends the DNRS program to a lot of his patients, that's part of the picture. Now, she had already done, I do not believe, I don't know, this is just my opinion, I do not believe that somebody that is really sick and hasn't dealt with all of these things, I don't think they would be able to fix it just by doing brain stuff. But it's, clearly, as I say, results are, it worked for her.
Well, Dorothy, you're not alone in that, because, and we tend to agree that it has to be at the right time in your healing journey for you to benefit from something like DNRS. And we heard from many, many past podcast guests, and most recently it was Rachel Roller, who we interviewed, who talked about how she went through everything similar to your daughter, did all the treatment, she made major strides in her healing, but was still having these food and chemical sensitivities. But then once she started DNRS and brain retraining exercises, she really got her life back. And she felt the same way, that she had to be at that point in her healing journey to be able to benefit from that therapy. So it's something that seems so bizarre at first, but many people are having amazing, amazing results from trying this therapy. And I want to ask you this question now, because your daughter went from being in a wheelchair, not being able to sleep, and being miserable, but it sounds like she's made such major progress. So how's your daughter's health today?
She's in good shape. She's in good shape, and she she had been doing a lot of physical activity and stuff that a lot of that has been shut down. And, with the pandemic, she'd been going, there's something called aerial yoga, where it's like a gym that has things hanging from the ceiling, and you do, I don't know, I've seen videos of it. I haven't seen her do it in person. So, but I mean, she can just physically do a lot of stuff she couldn't do today. And, but it's, unfortunately, with the pandemic, things are, she considers herself, she doesn't want to get COVID. And, she considers herself like, whoa, I don't, let's, we're not doing that. So she's been doing her best to, isolate, etc. But it's amazing to me. And even when she had just gotten to the point where she was out of the wheelchair, but she still had lots of other issues, when I was doing the support group, there would be people that would say, I heard that your daughter was in a wheelchair and now she's out, and so I want to have a list of everything that she did, and then I want to do the exact same things. And I'm always willing to share our experience, but I really try to put it in the context is, this is the package of stuff that worked for us. And I've heard things from people, that something works well for them. As I mentioned that earlier, somebody else does it, works poorly. In the Sacramento support group, there was something you don't hear about much anymore, but there was an alternative treatment in the early days that was getting a lot of currency. That was the SALT-C protocol, high levels of sodium, high levels of vitamin C, and that there were people that claimed that it really helped them. And there was a fellow that in our group that had Lyme for years, had Lyme before it was a thing, had been bitten by a tick and had health problems before, it had ever been identified as Lyme disease. And later, anyway. So he tried the SALT-C protocol, and he said that it helped him amazingly. And he came to the group and he told people all about it. And as I say, I know him. I'm glad he found something that helped him. And another woman in the group talked to him about it and went home and tried it. And she ended up in the hospital. And she had undiagnosed liver problems. And apparently this thing is the wrong thing to do for undiagnosed liver problems. And I don't know anything more about it than that. But as I say, two people that I've known for a long time, and she ended up being okay. But she, that I have respect for both of them, and they both did it, and they got totally opposite results. Same thing happens with antibiotics. Some people say, boy, they just put me on that thing and then I was good to go. And other people, no. And so it really is important for people to, do their own work, figure out what works for them, try things a little bit before you try it a lot. And find out, that I have no personal experience at all, but there's a lot of people that are having good results with disulfiram. And what I would suggest to anybody that asks is there are some Facebook groups for people that are on disulfiram, specifically disulfiram for Lyme. And I would recommend that somebody get on there and really get to know them and talk to them and figure out what you're doing. And if you decide to go in that direction. I don't give people treatment advice. You know, I don't tell them they should or shouldn't try disulfiram, but I'm happy to tell people that I think they should do their research before they do something.
So Dorothy, it's really wonderful to hear that your daughter's doing so well. So now I have another question for you. And how are you doing? How is mom doing after going on this really, really difficult journey with your daughter?
Well, it's an interesting question. When I was in the midst of all of that, and I hear this from other people too, it's like, boy, when I'm done with this fire that's right in front of me, I'm going to do something to fix this situation. And, when my daughter was still in the worst of it, was when I found out online that Andy Wilson was making the movie Under Our Skin. And they were, they were doing fundraising. That was before GoFundMe pages or Kickstarter or whatever. But they were, circling around and asking people for donations and whatever. And I sent him $100. I'm not going to be, I'm not in a position to be one of his big time donors. But I sent him an email and I said, is there anything that I can do for you long distance? I said, I can't leave the house, but I said, I remember saying I'm good with my Google finger. So I said, can you, I said, is there anything that I can do for you? And he sent me a list of stuff, of things that they wanted to research, just that, can you locate, I don't even remember now what it was. Can you find this? Can you find this? And I went through the list and I found them all and I sent them back and quickly, like the next day or something. And he was like, oh, well, thank you. And then he sent me some more. And so I remember feeling empowered by that. And then when that movie came back, they also gave me, my name is in the credits, and research or something. I don't remember what they said. But I was like, yeah, I can do something. And so that's when, I had long been involved with these online groups. And so one of California Lyme was started by Phyllis Mervine, who's the founder of what's now called LymeDisease.org. At that time, it was called California Lyme Disease Association. And I got to know her through that. And eventually it was like, well, when I got to a point where I could do things more, even if it wasn't so much leaving the house, but I could, sit at the computer and do my own stuff. It wasn't just, just specifically trying to find treatment for my daughter. I just started getting involved with, as I say, first CALDA, now we're called LymeDisease.org. And when then Facebook started in like, 06 or 07 or something like that. And I think I got on it on 08. That was when my daughter started walking and my life freed up a lot. And so, Facebook and Twitter and that was when people were just starting to talk about blogs. That was just a thing. I remember when people were talking about blogs and I was never sure exactly what blogs were. And then that was when the Huffington Post got started, which now is kind of a different thing than it was in the beginning, but that was really groundbreaking. And they had all these collection of blogs in one place. And I remember meeting Lorraine Johnson in person, who's the head of our organization. And I told her, I told her about that when I was looking for information, there wasn't any place to go and get it. Where's this, I want information about Lyme disease. And so we talked about starting blogs. And so we did. It's been 11 and a half years ago. We started the LymeDisease.org blogs, and I started a blog called Touched by Lyme. And Lorraine started something called Lyme Policy Wonk. We now use blogs from, guests, guest writers and, other people. So we, in different categories, sometimes patients telling their stories, sometimes a researcher, that kind of thing. We also just run news items if something comes out, relative to Lyme disease. And so we started that, and then we started posting those on Facebook and Twitter, and now there's Pinterest and Instagram and all of that kind of spreading out to that. And what's really happened in the beginning, 15 years ago, I could only find one book on Amazon that had to do with Lyme disease. And there was very little information online that had to do with Lyme disease. And I started Google alerts for myself for Lyme disease and co-infections and, all of those kinds of things. And the Lyme disease Google alert, I'd get maybe one notification a week. And now it's the opposite problem. There's so much, I get probably 100 Google alerts for Lyme disease. I probably get 100 listings a day. And it doesn't mean that they're all necessarily worthwhile, but they show up. And there's lots of information about Lyme disease, from the various advocacy groups, which I'd say in general that's good information. There's a lot of information that isn't, that isn't great. And there's tons of books on Amazon. If you just put in Lyme disease, there's just, I haven't done that lately, but I mean, it's a big number, whatever it is, it's a big number. And so now the problem, the challenge is to curate information and to get, there's all this stuff out here, you're looking for Lyme disease information, and it's like you stand there and a dump truck, buries you in so to speak. And so it's, so I still do I'm the editor of the blogs. And so, other people may write them, but I choose them and shape them and that kind of thing. And then we, and then that information is shared via social media and whatever. And so I get a lot of satisfaction out of that. And I feel like I remember those days, back in 05 or 06, there was a time where Dr. Jones, the pediatric Lyme specialist in Connecticut, was being brought up on charges. And that's later shown in the movie Under Our Skin, for people that might be familiar with that. But I was aware through looking at things on LymeNet that this was going on. And I kept, I wanted to have more information about it, and I would Google it and whatever. And there was no information out there in the universe, seemingly. And so that's one of the things that I have viewed our news blogs and the social media that goes along with it, of pointing things out to people. It's a place where you can go and find out, well, what is happening. And there's still, our doctors their medical licenses are being, challenged because of, refusal to follow the IDSA, the IDSA guidelines. And there are other issues that are coming up. And so it's kind of like, my little media fiefdom, where, we put those things. We cover a lot of the tick-borne disease working group has been going on for, it's in its second incarnation now. And there's a controversy associated with that, and we cover that as try to let people know. And the fact of the matter is, more, you keep track of how many hits you get on things. More of our audience is interested when a celebrity, Justin Bieber had Lyme disease. Those are the ones that really get the hits. And the tick-borne disease working group, not as many hits as Justin Bieber. But the fact is it's still important, and it's there. And so that's what I do. And,
so Dorothy, let's talk about and I do want to talk a little bit more about some of the projects at LymeDisease.org, and I appreciate you sharing with us the transition you made into this becoming a huge part of your life. Talk to us about your book, When Your Child Has Lyme Disease, and what inspired you to write that book, and how has that book been received? Because as you know, I'm a big fan of yours because of your book and the strength of your writing and the power of your writing. And I guess even more importantly, one of the reasons why I'm such a big fan of yours is because in most of the interviews that we've done, we have found families torn apart by Lyme disease. And quite frankly, many of the children who have suffered from Lyme disease had been abandoned by their parents because their parents did not believe that they were physically sick, but they were in fact malingering or emotionally ill and refusing to get help. Whereas you went the opposite direction. You're one of the few, unfortunately, where you went from knowing nothing about ticks, never seeing one, nothing about Lyme disease, to now being one of the leading Lyme disease advocates in the country. So talk to us about how you went from where you were to where you are, and what role that played in you developing, I think, the premier guide on how families should come together to defend themselves against Lyme disease.
Well, yeah, that's really a loaded topic because families are torn apart by this. I think in our particular case, the fact that our daughter was so young when this is happening, I think that it is easier for the parent to believe, you know, this isn't normal for my child. You know, she needs our help, and go from that place. I hear so many stories from people, particularly that are like maybe in their 20s, where maybe they've already flown the nest, gone to college, done whatever they're doing, and then the parents are like, well, why are you being like this? You know, just get up. And it also depends on, it also depends on how it manifests, because if for many people, the overwhelming symptom is fatigue. In fact, in the My Lyme Data program, I believe that's the number one. You know, we ask people to list we ask everybody to say what are your 3 top symptoms.
Doctor, before you go into that, why don't you share with our listeners what the program is and how they could participate, and then let's talk about some of the findings. So let's talk about the program first.
Okay.
Please.
Okay. Well, My Lyme Data was started 5 years ago, 2015. We launched it, and there had never been any program to collect information about people with long-term Lyme disease. There are similar programs that some of them run by the government, some of them run by other research organizations that for, you know, various kinds of cancer or heart disease or whatever, but there'd never been any information about Lyme disease. And so, you know, for starters, you want to know how is it affecting people? And part of this is that the way the IDSA, Infectious Diseases Society of America, which puts out the Lyme guidelines that the CDC and others adhere to, they have always viewed Lyme disease as an acute illness, an acute early stage illness. You just, you know, give them 2-3 weeks of doxycycline and you're done. You know, you're good to go. And so all these people that come back and say later that they have this other problem, they're still fatigued, they've got these other symptoms, they, you know, whatever, it's like, they just say, well, it's, you know, it's not Lyme disease. And so, you know, and so that has really gotten in the way. Why would you do a study of people if you don't accept that their disease even exists? And so we started it, and this is Lorraine Johnson is the principal investigator of it. She is the head of our organization, and she's an attorney, and she has lots of experience in lots of things, and she has had Lyme disease herself. And anyway, and she's been involved in a lot of things, healthcare policy type things that I'm glad she's doing it. Let's say I don't know, I don't know all the details on that kind of thing, but this is done with scientific rigor in terms of the way questions are asked. It would actually take, if somebody signs up for this, you don't have to do it all in one sitting, but I think your initial one would maybe take, 40 minutes or something of sitting down, and you say, how long you've been sick, and how, what kinds of symptoms that you've had, what kinds of treatments that you've had, various things. And depending on how you answer one question, that maybe leads you to certain kinds of questions. Because if you don't say you've had heart involvement, then they don't ask you any further questions about that. Anyway, it was a few years ago, this team of mathematicians at UCLA got a grant from the National Science Foundation for $800,000 to work with my Lyme data to do various kinds of things. They're not working on trying to solve it. I mean, as treat it as a medical condition, they're looking at analyzing the data and what you can predict, something called predictive analytics. Like if somebody answers XYZ, how likely are they to have this other outcome?
So they're looking for patterns.
Yeah, they're looking for patterns. And so it's very interesting because people, the only thing you need to be able to get into it is you have to have been diagnosed with Lyme disease in the United States. And so it can be a clinical diagnosis, but you have to have had a diagnosis, because if somebody just wants to sit there and say, well, I've had problems for 20 years and I think maybe I have Lyme disease, that isn't what we're looking for here. We're looking for people who have been diagnosed with Lyme disease and to capture their experience.
So Dorothy, let's pause here for one quick second, because during the course of our interaction with folks in the Lyme community, we are often asked, how can I help? And one of the things that we want to encourage our listeners to do is to sign up at My Lyme Data and provide their information if they have either a clinical diagnosis or a diagnosis from some form of testing, because it's really important that we bring as many people into this data set as possible so that we can, of course, encourage the best results. So Dorothy, talk about how folks can participate in the My Lyme Data program.
Well, the main thing is that it doesn't cost anything. And I also want to say, we do not sell this information. There are other groups that collect this kind of information about other diseases that sometimes fund themselves by selling that information to big pharma or whatever. We don't do that. It's just, we have very, very strict policies in place that doesn't happen. And
That's
it's
great.
also very, it's also, our privacy is a concern. It's all de-identified. And, so basically you go to mylymedata.org is one way you can get there, or you can go to lymedisease.org, and we have we have a button on our homepage. So either one of those will take you there, and you fill out information. And if you can't do it all in one sitting, you can it'll hold your place, and you can come back and finish it the next day. We have also started something that we just launched in May that is within the My Lyme Data program project. It's a separate questionnaire, if you will, that is if you've had COVID-19 as well as Lyme. And so we're just collecting that information to see what happens. And we've had 1,000 people who have answered that. They say there's between 12 and 13,000 in the program, but 1,000 of them have answered that. So, and it isn't necessarily that you had COVID. It could be that a member of your family had it, it's that kind of thing. But it's just, you can answer that if you want to. You don't have to answer that one. If it doesn't apply to you, you don't have to go down that one. But and so people can go to the website. There is something that we put out a year ago called the 2019 chart book from the My Lyme Data Registry. And you can download a copy of it for free, and it basically summarizes things that had been found by that point. And so, as I say, so we wouldn't include the COVID stuff because that came later. But and one of the things that was very interesting to me is that the UCLA people working with the numbers really found that people fell into certain categories, like what they call, like, let's say you took antibiotics and you say, yeah, it helped me a lot. You would be a high responder. And then somebody else, helped me some, you'd be, sort of an in-between responder. And then somebody else didn't help me at all, low responder, non-responder. And those categories they can look at. So the secret can be, okay, what is it about high responders? And, so what can we learn from high responders that maybe can help the low responders? So it's that when it used to be, typical kind of, experiment or study, research, you might just say, oh, well, there were 20 people and 10 people, were helped by treatment and 10 people were not helped by treatment. So what's the average treatment response? 0. So it didn't help anybody. This way, let's look at the people that were helped and see if there's things that we can learn there. And we're also doing a study in terms of sex and gender, in terms of, do women have different kinds of symptoms than men have?
Do you have any early results on that? Because our experience has been that women and men do, in fact, react to Lyme differently. Do you have any early results that suggest that to be the case?
Yeah, that there are different things. We're actually, I think they're preparing something on that hasn't been released yet. So I'm not privy to the details, but that's been something that's been going on. In terms of social media, I would say, well, almost everybody that follows us on Facebook is female. They'll give you those but there, there's plenty of there's plenty of men that have it, but maybe they just don't do Facebook in the same way or don't follow us or read our blogs. But so there's lots of things like that can be found. And one of the things that's been very gratifying for us is that researchers are interested in this, because this can help suggest research questions. In the past, somebody, maybe they just came up with a research question on their own, a research scientist, because why don't we look at such and such? But here, if you get statistics that, and what I started to say was that that one of the questions they ask is, what would you say are your 3 worst symptoms? And so people say whatever they say on those. And the one that gets mentioned absolutely the most is fatigue. And that's where, I don't even remember the point that I was making earlier, but that's what got us going in this direction. But that fatigue is but again, there's other people, even like with the COVID thing, eventually, initially they were saying, oh, everybody has a fever. Well, it turns out everybody doesn't have a fever.
Right.
And so
there's a diversity of symptomology in Lyme, just like there is in COVID, and that we're also seeing a diversity in immune response, at least with gender, in COVID, and we may be seeing a similar distinction in Lyme.
Yeah. And so there's a lot of this stuff that, it's like as you were saying earlier, looking for patterns. You get this information. They have, I'm told they have more than 3 million data points in this program and for My Lyme data. And you just wouldn't be able to do any of that without the big data technology that they have now. So you couldn't do that kind of study in the past. And to do, traditionally they say, oh, well, clinical trials, are the best thing. Clinical trials are slow and they're expensive. And, Brian Fallon did one, he's at Columbia, and he did one some years back. And I don't have the number right in front of me, but it was like, he had to go through like 3,000 people or something to find 100 people that met their criteria. You have to have certain kind of criteria to be allowed in the study. And then the study maybe is valid for people that meet those criteria, but how about all those other people that weren't included? It's not helping them. And so it's exciting. The My Lyme Data Project is exciting, and it's something that people can do. And what I started to say, so you sign up. It takes the first time, it takes more time, that because you're going, you're putting your background and everything. And then, but then you get sent an email reminder, I don't know, every 6 months or something. And then they just ask if you would be willing to update things. So has something changed in the last 6 months? Are you on a different treatment? Are you getting better? Are you getting worse? No different, that kind of thing. And then, as I say, we offered this thing about the COVID, if that's something that somebody wants to participate in. So my daughter signed up for it. See, I can't sign up for it. I didn't have Lyme disease.
Thank God you didn't.
Right. But my daughter is a member of it. She was one of the first people to sign up. And so as I say, it's every 6 months or whatever, they get this thing, and you can go in and you can, you're getting better, you're getting worse or whatever. And it's something that people can do. It's something that, just like when I was home and I wanted to do Googling for the movie, it's a contribution a meaningful contribution that people can do.
So Dorothy, let's talk about the future for Dorothy Leland. You went from being essentially a mom at home who was willing to offer her Googling skills and her research skills. You then became an activist in the community by joining organizations such as, I guess it was California Lyme or Cal Lyme, which then brought you to LymeDisease.org, and then, of course, authorship of a brilliant book. What's the future for Dorothy? Where do you go from here?
Well, I don't know. Interesting question. I mean, I enjoy what I do with LymeDisease.org. I enjoy, more than I thought I was going to. I enjoy the process of, we're trying to bring in different voices in terms of guest blogs and that sort of thing. And so I invite people that are listening to this, if they want to write a guest blog, to send me an email. And we can't necessarily accept everything that gets submitted, but we are looking. And so my email is dleland, DLELAND @LymeDisease.org. And I shouldn't have to tell this audience that it's LYME. Sometimes some people, I tell them that's my email address and they spell it the other way.
All right, and we'll make sure they don't add an S on Lyme either.
Right.
No Lyme's disease or no Lyme.
Yeah, can't.
So now, Dorothy, I take you to the place where we take every single one of our podcast guests at the end of the podcast interview. And that is, if God forbid, your son walked into your office and showed you that he was being bitten by a tick, what steps would you recommend that he take so that he would not have to suffer the terrible chronic Lyme disease journey that your daughter had to travel?
Well, I would have him careful. Also, my son and other people related to me have gotten every kind of insect shield and piece of clothing and tick removers and that sort of thing, you know, where it's like, oh no, here she is coming again, giving us stuff like that. But
All right,
I would.
so let's assume your son didn't wear all the shields that he would need
Right.
in order to be able to avoid ticks, and
Right.
the tick ultimately did bite him. What would you recommend that he do in that moment so that he wouldn't have to go on a chronic Lyme disease journey?
I would recommend that he remove the tick carefully and send it to, there's a number of places that you know, where it can be checked for pathogens. And the only one that I can think of off the top of my head is tickreport.com, but there are others. That's the one that sticks in my brain at the moment. Where you can send it. I think they're listed on our website too, but anyway. And so I would have the tick tested. I would have him get in contact with, there are ILADS doctors and similar practitioners who will do what's called a recent tick bite appointment, where they will try to get you in right away. A lot of times it's with the nurse practitioner or physician's assistant or something like that, and that they'll really go over what they feel that you need to go over, you know, in terms of your personal history and that kind of thing. I would, you know, again, I hesitate to tell other people what they should take. I would want them to discuss that with the doctor, but I would certainly bring up the issue of, you know, immediate doxycycline, even though it isn't our favorite drug for a lot of reasons. For lots of people, it can be very effective if taken right away. And I think one of the most important things is that people be aware of it. And if you go to your doctor, your, you know, typical doctor, you know, certainly around here, will say, no ticks around here, you don't have to worry about that. Oh, you have a tick. Well, no Lyme disease around here. Well, what if it's not Lyme disease? What if it's something else? Oh, no, we don't have any problem like that. No, not to worry. And I have been told that by different members in my group, support group and stuff, where they call, you know, a lot of medical groups have the advice nurse, and they call the advice nurse, and the advice nurse tells them that no, it's impossible. Still, after all these years and everything, will say it's impossible to get Lyme disease in the state of California. And it's like, one, it's not true, and it's a real, you know, so you just have to recognize that you have to keep pushing. If it was me, myself, I would take doxycycline. And then, but again, I know there are people that shouldn't do that for other reasons, and that there are, I was actually going to go and check, you interviewed Dr. Rowles recently, and I'm not sure what his recommendations might be. I think that there are some alternative recommendations for that. But I said one of the, you know, one of the most important things I think is that people have to have a high level of suspicion. And instead of this, oh, you'll be fine, don't worry about it, isn't. But in my daughter's case, we were not aware of a tick bite. So tick bites, you know, an awful lot of people, you know, another issue that's just come out, you know, recently, I was reading something about it recently, is Borrelia miyamotoi. Actually, you know, it's a different kind of Borrelia, and it's actually in the relapsing fever category, and not specifically like Burgdorferi, but it gives pretty much the same symptoms as Lyme disease, and it doesn't show up in a test. And so, you know,
You would urge folks to continue to be mindful of their symptoms, regardless of what the testing shows.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And
including
the
thing is,
testing, including the
yeah.
testing of the tick, because there is the possibility that a tick could be tested for pathogens, but the pathogens that are tested are not going to be the entirety of the pathogens that could be spit into someone, and therefore you may still get sick from Lyme disease, which, by the way, let me ask you this before I let you go. Do you define Lyme disease as a disease that is a consequence of being infected with one bacteria, or do you define Lyme disease as a multi-germ infection?
Oh, multi-germ, definitely. It's one of those things that it's easier to say Lyme disease than to say, like Dr. Horowitz has, MSIDS and, that kind of thing, these long names for it. But I think most of us, when we say Lyme disease, we mean the whole, the whole ball of wax, including mold and, some of these other things. And you can also get, you can get sick with something that didn't come from the tick, but the tick lowered your immune, system. And so then you got this other thing on top of it. And I think that is one of the things that's a big issue, is that traditionally, at least my experience of traditional doctors, is they tend to look at it as like, well, you got bitten by a tick, and then if you in fact got the disease, then you got the disease. And that's the only thing you're working with. When it's like, you can have a whole lot of stuff wrong with you. And getting back to my daughter's situation, I've had the chiropractor that did all the upper cervical stuff with her, I was asking him about that. And he was saying, well, she played sports, she'd done a lot of things. The neck was really out of alignment. And then it made it, the body was less capable. It sort of impaired, that in itself impaired the immune system. Everything wasn't flowing the way it was supposed to flow. And so the infection, he was not saying she didn't have Lyme disease. He wasn't saying that at all. And there's plenty of people that have it and don't have that manifestation of it, and so what package of symptoms is involving one person, and
what package of challenges they may have to their immune response, such as in your daughter's case, the cervical challenges that only the chiropractor would have been able to resolve for her.
Right. And so it's like, and yeah, it's very, I don't claim, I mean, you kindly referred to me as, sort of an expert or something. I mean, I don't consider myself an expert at all.
Well, we do.
I mean, yeah, it's that I have some experience in dealing with it, but there's so much that isn't known. There's so much that isn't known. And so the My Lyme Data program is one of the things that we're doing is we're trying to uncover some of these things. I was just going to mention one more thing about My Lyme Data. We're actually going to separate this out into a separate thing that somebody would only have to do once. There is a way, if somebody has died, if somebody had Lyme disease and they died, not necessarily that they died from Lyme disease, they could have been a car accident, but somebody that is deceased, and if their family member wants to put information, if they know information about the kind of treatment that they had and whatever, there is a mechanism for doing that as a program. That would just be a one-shot deal. Another wrinkle is that if you have little kids, a parent who is sick, the child is sick, a parent can do it on behalf of the child.
Great.
And then if the child, then turns 18 and wants to continue doing it themselves, they can do that.
Thank you for listening to the Tick Boot Camp interview with our guest, Dorothy Leland. To our listeners, we have a call to action. First, if you'd like to learn more about Dorothy Leland and her family's Lyme disease journey, please purchase her book, When Your Child Has Lyme Disease, A Parent's Survival Guide, or read her blog titled Touched by Lyme that appears regularly on lymedisease.org. Second, if you enjoyed this episode of the Tick Boot Camp podcast, please share it with your friends by using the social media buttons you see at the bottom of the post. Third, we are regularly asked, what can I do to help on the Lyme disease cause? And the first answer we give to people is to recommend that they go to lymedisease.org and participate in the My Lyme Data process. My Lyme Data is a patient-powered research project that was conceived by patients, run by patients, and addresses the issues patients care about. This project lets Lyme disease patients learn from each other, and provides data that is being used to drive research and to improve the lives of Lyme disease patients. Fourth, don't forget to subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Google Play Music, or on Spotify to get your automatic episode updates of our Tick Boot Camp podcast. And finally, please take a minute to leave us a review on iTunes or our website. Thank you for listening.